This is Carthage. For more than 500 years, this was the center of an empire that stretched from Spain to Sicily. This was Rome's arch-nemesis, immensely wealthy, vastly powerful, defeated only after 3 of the bloodiest wars in ancient history. After the last of those wars, Carthage was razed to the ground, but only a century later, it was re-established as a Roman colony, and soon became the most important city in the Western Roman Empire after Rome itself. Little of this grandeur is visible today. Carthage has become a suburb of Tunis, and most of its ancient buildings were pulled apart for their stone long ago. All that remains are fragments of the great Roman city, and the ghost of Punic Carthage beneath. Let's explore. Carthage had 2 harbors, one for commercial vessels, now mostly silted over, and one for warships. This was the military harbor. Though used and remodeled by the Romans, it was given its shape by the Carthaginians. It was a vast circle, with a round island in the center, where I'm standing. Both the island and perimeter of the harbor were occupied by sheds for warships, with an estimated capacity of 200 galleys, each some 120 feet long. It was from here that the great fleets of the First Punic War sailed, and to here that Hannibal returned after his years in Italy. The most infamous Carthaginian practice was the sacrifice of children to the gods Baal-Hamon and Tanit. Although there is no doubt that child sacrifice took place, its scale is disputed. Here, in the so-called Salammbo Tophet, the Carthaginians buried thousands of infants and young children. It's unclear how many of them were sacrificed. The cemetery was used for centuries, graves piling on graves, which is why it's so cluttered now. The reliefs on these grave stelae changed over time. The earliest examples show a simple beetle, a sort of bottle shape. You can see one in the foreground here. Later, more complex images appeared, including the symbol of the goddess Tanit. This is later Roman structure, but it's worth a look inside. Bear with me for a moment. Plenty of puddles from last night's rain, and yet more steely. Although most of the Carthaginian city has been covered by its Roman successor, part of this area, the so-called Magon Quarter, has been cleared down to Punic levels, exposing some small but well-built Carthaginian houses, some dating back to the 5th century BC. On the other side of the Magon Quarter, by the water, we have a small fragment of the Carthaginian seawall. Those large blocks in the center of our screen belong to the wall's foundations. Looking back towards the Magon Quarter, we see this late Roman building, possibly a church. This was a Roman-era street. There are a few bits of pavement still preserved. And down in the bay, you can see quite a bit of ancient masonry, though the era to which it belongs is difficult to tell. Here, as in so much else about ancient Carthage, there is much more room for investigation. The monuments of Roman Carthage were torn apart for their stone centuries ago. Some, however, were so imposing that even all of that relentless plunder couldn't level them entirely. These are the Antonine Baths, the most spectacular of the city's ruins, built in the mid-2nd century AD. Though only the foundations survive, even these are enough to give a sense of the vast scale of the baths, which approached that of the great imperial thermae in Rome. The column we see in the distance is 70 feet tall. The service corridors beneath the baths were used primarily by slaves, who carried fuel for the furnaces through them. They mirrored the shape of the rooms and corridors above. So here, in this circular area, We know we're beneath the vast rotunda of the Caldarium, the main hot room. That looming granite column we've been seeing the past 15 seconds or so stood in the main Frigidarium, the cold room. Imagine the vault of the Frigidarium rising from the top of that column. Even down here in the basement, the scale of the rubble is pretty astonishing. This chunk here, to my right, is about the size of a large house. The Byrsa was the citadel of Punic Carthage, where the inhabitants made their desperate last stand against the legions of Scipio Aemilianus. When the Roman colony was established here a century later, the entire top of the hill was cleared and cut away 30 feet to make room for the Forum and Capitolium. The rubble was formed into terraces, inadvertently preserving some of the Carthaginian houses on the upper slopes. You see those houses here. They date to the end of Carthaginian history, the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, and were destroyed by Scipio's armies. Most were two-story structures centered on a courtyard with a cistern below. Beside them are the colossal piers that supported the Roman terraces. Two empires, one over the other, here in the heart of ancient Carthage.